All day long, we've been sitting here and listening to my friends across the aisle and their witnesses claim that the president demanded Ukraine do us a favor by assisting in 2020 re-election campaign before he would release the military aid. This is, like everything else in the sham impeachment, purposefully misleading and not based on the facts. So let's review the actual transcript of the call. They never mentioned the 2020 election. They never mentioned military aid. It does, however, clearly show that the favor the president requested was assistance with the ongoing investigation into the 2016 election. Those investigations, particularly the one being run by U.S. Attorney Jeff Durham, should concern Democrats. And the transcript of this call shows that the president was worried about the efforts of Ukraine relating to the 2016 election. We know this, and notice I'm using the word know and not the word infer, from reading the transcript and because he spoke about it ending with Mueller. We know this because he wants the Attorney General to get in touch with the Ukrainians about the issue. We have a treaty with Ukraine governing these sorts of international investigations. But like so many other things, these facts are inconvenient for Democrats. They don't fit the impeachment narrative, so they're misrepresented or ignored. And I think it's important when we talk about this, and whatever the burden of proof, beyond a reasonable doubt, clear and convincing evidence, whether it's a judicial hearing, a quasi-judicial hearing, or a congressional hearing, when we're talking about these issues, I think we need to start with how we look at it. And I'm not a constitutional law professor. I'm just an old criminal defense attorney. But when I walk into a courtroom, I think of three things. What's the crime charge? What's the conduct? And who's the victim? And we've managed to make it till 5 o'clock today before we've talked about the alleged victim of the crime. And that's President Zelensky. And at 3 different times, President Zelensky, at least 3 different times, has denied being pressured by the president. The call shows laughter, pleasantries, cordiality. September 25th, President Zelensky states, "No, you heard that we had a good phone call. It was normal. We spoke about many things. I think you read it and nobody pushed me." October 10th, President Zelensky had a press conference, and I encourage everybody to watch it. Even if you don't understand it, 90% of communication's nonverbal. You tell me if you think he's lying. There was no blackmail. December 2nd, this Monday, I never talked to the president from the position of quid pro quo. So we have the alleged victim of quid pro quo, bribery, extortion, whatever we're dealing with now today, repeatedly and adamantly shouting from the rooftops that he never felt pressure, that he was not the victim of anything. So in order for this whole thing to stick, we have to believe that President Zelensky is a pathological liar, or that the Ukrainian president and the country are so weak that he has no choice but to parade himself out there, demoralize himself for the good of his country. Either of these two assertions weakens their countries and harms our efforts to help the Ukraine. And also begs the question of how on earth did President Zelensky withstand this illegal and impeachable pressure to begin with? Because this fact still has not changed. The aid was released to Ukraine and did not take any action from them in order for it to flow. And with that, I yield to my friend, Mr. Jordan.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Professor Carlin, context is important, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, because just a few minutes ago when our colleague from Florida presented a statement you made, you said, well, you got to take that statement in context, but it seems to me you don't want to extend the same or apply the same standard to the president. Because the now famous quote, "I would like you to do us a favor," you said about an hour and a half ago, that didn't mean us, it meant the president himself. But that's the clear reading of this. I would like you to do us a favor, though, because, you know what the next 2 words are?
I don't have the document.
I'll tell you, because our country. He didn't say, I would like you to do me a favor, though, because I have been through a lot. He said, I want you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot. You know what when this call happened? Happened the day after Mueller was in front of this committee. Of course, our country was put through 2 years of this. And the idea that you're now going to say, oh, this is the royal we, and he's talking about himself, ignores the entire context of his statement. That whole paragraph, you know what he ends that paragraph with? Talking about Bob Mueller. And this is the basis for this impeachment, this call. It couldn't be further from the truth. You want the standard to apply when Representative Gates makes one of your statements. Oh, you got to look at the context. But when the President of the United States is clear, you try to change his word. And when the context is clear, he's talking about the 2 years that this country went through because of this Mueller report, somehow that
time has
standard doesn't
expired.
apply to the president. That is
The
ridiculous.
gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Scanlon.
I want to thank our constitutional experts for walking us through the framers' thinking on impeachment and why they decided it was a necessary part of our Constitution. I'm going to ask you to help us understand the implications of the president's obstruction of Congress's investigation into his use of the office of the president to squeeze the Ukrainian government to help the Trump re-election campaign. And there's certainly hundreds of pages on how one reaches that conclusion. We know the president's obstruction did not begin with the Ukraine investigation. Instead, his conduct is part of a pattern, and I'll direct your attention to the timeline on the screen. In the left-hand column, we see the president's statement from his July call in which he pressured Ukraine, a foreign government, to meddle in our elections. Then once Congress got wind of it, the president tried to cover up his involvement by obstructing the congressional investigation and refusing to cooperate. But this isn't the first time we've seen this kind of obstruction. In the right-hand column, we can flash back to the 2016 election when the president welcomed and used Russians' interference in our election. And again, when the special counsel and then this committee tried to investigate the extent of his involvement, he did everything he could to cover it up. So it appears the president's obstruction of investigations is part of a pattern. First, he invites foreign powers to interfere in our elections. Then he covers it up. And finally, he obstructs lawful inquiries into his behavior, whether by Congress or law enforcement. And then he does it again. So, Professor Gerhardt, how does the existence of such a pattern help determine whether the president's conduct is impeachable?
The pattern, of course, gives us a tremendous insight into the context of his behavior. When he's acting, and how do we explain those actions? By looking at the pattern. We can infer I think a very strong inference, in fact, is that this is deviating from the usual practice, and he's been systematically heading towards a culmination where he can ask this question. By the way, after the July 25th call, the money's not yet released. It's not, and there's ongoing conversations we learned from other testimony that essentially the money is being withheld because the president wanted to make sure the deliverable was going to happen, that is the announcement and investigation.
And in addition to the money not being released, there also was not the White House meeting, which was so important to Ukrainian security, right?
Yes, ma'am, that's right.
Okay. Professor Feldman, we noted previously that a federal district court recently rejected the president's attempt to block witnesses from testifying to Congress, saying that presidents are not kings. The founders included two critical provisions in our Constitution to prevent our president from becoming a king and our democracy from becoming a monarchy. And those protections were presidential elections and impeachment, correct?
Correct.
Based on the pattern of conduct that we're discussing today, the pattern of inviting foreign interference in our elections for political gain and then obstructing lawful investigation, has the president undermined both of those protections?
He has, and it's crucial to note that the victim of a high crime and misdemeanor, such as the president's alleged to have committed, is not President Zelensky and is not the Ukrainian people. The victim of the high crime and misdemeanor is the American people. Alexander Hamilton said very clearly that the nature of a high crime and misdemeanor is that they are related to injuries done to the society itself. We, the American people, are the victims of the high crime and misdemeanor.